Dear colleagues, thank you for joining us this evening for the public event in the frame of the exhibition about Ukrainian art, Artist as a Prophet. My name is Oksana Shchur. I am curator of UNEST Berlin, the project for human rights defenders and civil society activists from Ukraine. Which is aimed not only for bringing all these people together and supporting them here in Berlin, but also for building the community through the public talks, discussions, communication. And today our event is called Artist as a Target. We need to start the story not since the past year, 2022, not since 10 years ago, but probably earlier and earlier. Because when we are talking about Ukrainian artists as a target of regime, we remember that most territory of Ukraine were under Russia in the with different names, under Russia power, and Ukrainian artists who collaborated with regime were under pressure in different senses. When artists tried to be a tool of propaganda or to influence on the society, on the community, they were also under pressure of totalitarian regime, or also were engaged in the fight for Ukrainian independence, or in emergency situations like this war. They were definitely directly targets. And this event today consists of two parts. First part, and I'm happy to introduce you Mariana Musii, art historian from Kiev, Ukraine, who worked for many Ukrainian art cultural institutions for many years. She will tell us about Ukrainian art and Ukrainian artists under Soviet regime. And Soviet Union was founded in 1922, 100 years ago, and Russian Federation claims that it is a rights holder and heritage holder of Soviet Union. So the story is definitely continuing during at least 100 years. And Mariana will tell us about many artists and their works, and also about different ways to be a target under pressure when you are possible target of regime physically during the Stalin repressions and later repressions, and also when you are very established artist, but you can be mentally destroyed. It is also another way. And after a short break, we will have the second part with Svitlana Valko, a Ukrainian human rights defender, who is also one of the founders of famous organization Truth Hounds, which documents war crimes during the past years in Ukraine and in all this post-Soviet region. And Svitlana will tell us about cultural heritage, war crimes connected with cultural heritage, and also about artists which are famous because they are killed by Russian missiles because they were killed during the war. And many artists in Ukraine now are also in the army, or they are engaged in this fight because they are volunteers, or they are providing different messages abroad and also inside the country, because this war is not only in the field, it is also informational war, and it is in all the world. And now I invite Mariana with her presentation about Ukrainian art and artists in 20th century. Mariana?
Thank you for introduction. This is my... It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming. Sorry? Keep the mic. Ah, okay. Okay, a kind of performance we are having here.
Probably our event is much more popular than estimated. But lecturer as a target.
Yeah. Okay, dear guests, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for choosing us to spend this Friday evening with. And today I will provide you with quite a brief survey of development of Ukrainian art and culture under Soviet rule, as current war of Russia against Ukraine really is a consequence of permanent attempts of Russia to absorb Ukraine into its body since 17th century. So due to the fact that we have only 45 minutes, I decided to reduce this story only to the last 100 years. But I start my story from 2022. Since Ukrainian heritage occurred to be endangered with Russian missile attacks, and a huge number of Ukrainian museum objects crossed the borders of European Union to be rescued of actually military of destroyers. Looking for positive moments of this fact, we can admit that this fact provided an opportunity to present Ukrainian art, especially of the first half of 20th century, to European community. Since the last year, Ukraine turned into main headlines of all media, but for most of Europeans, it still remains as terra incognita. So, therefore, these objects turned into a number of exhibitions, and it started in Madrid, in Museum Thyssen-Bornemisza National Museum, and presented objects from Ukrainian National Art Museum, Museum of Theater, Cinema, also located in Kyiv, and presents really iconic Ukrainian artists, namely Alexander Bogomazov, Vasil Yermilov, Viktor Palmov, Anatol Petritsky, alongside with Kazimir Malevich, Sonia Delaunay, Alexandra Ekster. Really, how to say, the names of the first row of avant-garde movement. However, not many people know really that their creation is mainly rooted in Ukrainian folk tradition, and their lives are connected to Ukraine very tightly. As for the moment, this exhibition is transformed a little bit, and it's available on display in Cologne, in Museum Ludwig, under the title Here and Now Modernism in Ukraine, 1930s, and Daria Koltsova. So till September 24, there is an opportunity to see these authentic art pieces by yourself in person. What is necessary to say here that the majority of these works survived by miracle in 1930s. After avant-garde artists and other movements were eradicated from Ukrainian cultural life during the great Stalin's purge. Most of these creators were declared as enemies of the people. It was such a label created by Soviet propagandists to claim those personalities who used other approaches which differed from the mainstream socialist realism art as a unique so-called artistic approach which was permitted within the whole USSR territory. Speaking about Great Purge, I will also say very briefly, because I will return a little bit later to this topic again. Most of these art pieces of enemies of the people were destroyed or ended up in Russian museum, mainly Russian museum collections like Hermitage or Tretyakov Gallery. And this fact allowed Russians to rewrite art history, actually as the whole history in general, but art history in particular, and to appropriate the whole achievements of not only Ukrainians, but all conquered nations who were embodied into the USSR political... sorry. Sorry. As we know, many of Ukrainian artists of that period now mostly are considered by international community as well as Russians. So they appropriated the heritage, and now we are facing again the challenge to return back our history and communicate again and again its history, its roots, and as well as contemporary. So, the sad irony is that now, 90 years after the Great Purge, we are facing the situation when we must again rescue our heritage from Russian military troops. So the story also turns again, because what Russians actually do right now, except all the crimes you know about, they are destroying infrastructure and cultural infrastructure of Ukraine. Here you can see some statistics which was recently provided by Ministry of Culture of Ukraine. These numbers are defining those institutions, organizations, objects and monuments which were destroyed or damaged by Russian army. What they actually do now, it's not a surprise actually for Ukrainians, because they really repeat those practices they predecessor used to do 100 years ago and later. And so now let's start the story. I'm starting it from 1917-1921. It was a brief period between one huge empires fall down and new ones raised up. And Ukrainians used this gap in between to assert their own statehood. Actually, this period is a period of a number of turbulent events and challenges which actually led to the establishment of Soviet Union in 1922. The failure of Ukrainian army, which was supposed to defend Ukrainian young state, established in 1917, and it was called Ukrainian People's Republic. The challenge was that Ukrainians had to fight against Red Army of Bolsheviks, Russian White Army. Also, it was a period of World War I. So and Ukraine has been a battlefield in between all the neighboring empires, trying to divide our territory again and again. What is important to say that despite that brief moment in Ukrainian history, Ukrainian authorities managed to establish most of main cultural and educational institutions, trying to give a solid basis for growing up a modern Ukrainian nation. Among them, it was a very important moment establishing Ukrainian Academy of Arts, which later was transformed into Kyiv Art Institute, and it was a really flourishing period for Ukrainian art. This academy was founded by brightest personalities of the time, because the idea to define Ukrainian, how to say properly, to define Ukrainian modern culture needed to be formally educated, first of all. So I will introduce you a couple of personalities to provide an impression of a wide range of artistic phenomena existing at that time in Ukraine. I'm not focusing on avant-garde because it's quite well known among European audience as well, but those artists who contributed a lot into forming and building up that Ukrainian idea concentrated mostly like quite mild oriented modernists. One of those was Alexander Murashko, and a painter with a brilliant artistic career who got an excellent education in European academies, and he was really very popular in Europe. He presented his works in numerous international artistic events of the time, including Venice Biennial, and his works were sold right immediately from the walls of exhibitions, and many of the art pieces belonging to him really right now it's impossible to say what collections they are belonging to. Unfortunately, Alexander Murashko, on the peak of his career, was murdered near his home by a gunshot, and till nowadays, this crime is remaining unsolved. However, his wife and many researchers say that it was connected with Bolsheviks' rule, which at that moment invaded Kyiv with their Red Army troops. Actually, they committed lots of crimes because their first invasion took took place in the beginning of 1918, and they committed from 3,000 to 5,000 murders, focusing mostly on the heads of Ukrainian movement, military elite, political activists, and so on and so on. So, politics of Bolsheviks from the very beginning was targeting really those people who made a difference within this society. Georgi Narbut, another prominent personality in artistic life of Ukraine, the artist who was focused on researching the history of Ukrainian art and trying to build up a big so-called new Ukrainian style. And mostly he worked in graphics, and he developed his own vision of implementing historical traditions and with contemporary movements. Unfortunately, he lived only 34 years. The disease took his life out, but in a view of upcoming events, we can understand that his fate was really very predictable, unfortunately. He was one of those who developed, as you can see, the first Ukrainian banknotes, stamp marks, symbols of Ukrainian state. So his impact and input into building up this visual identity of Ukrainian state was really very significant. Fedor Krychevsky is another top artist of the time, and he also was eventually rector, the head of Kyiv Art Institute, and he was extremely popular at that time. Here are presented like two maybe most renowned his art pieces, and Triptych Live was presented also on Venice Biennial and gained very good response from critics. However, these works were forbidden for decades afterwards. And his self-portrait in national clothes, it also considered by researchers as his political statement, because it was already 1930 and clouds gathered under the heads of all these active personalities. Alexander Bogomazov, also an iconic personality of the time, who also impacted a lot into forming a new generation of artists. And he was not only a painter, he developed his own theory of modern art based on dynamics and movement and so on. Which was very relevant to the time and avant-garde point of view. But again, he was focused on combining national traditions into the most contemporary trends of the time. So his approach was also both innovative and innovative and rooted into tradition. Why these artists, not only these ones, but in general, this generation were focused on digging into the history of Ukrainian art. It was a kind of source to build up this new phase of Ukrainian new modern nation, to build up this visual language which would define Ukrainians among other nations. Other nations, I mean those who were involved into Soviet Union. And also another professor, guest professor of Kiev Art Institute for a couple of years was Kazimir Malevich, taking part actively in Ukrainian life, artistic life. He, at that time, he also cooperated with film industry. With he was publishing his works in Ukrainian very popular magazine. New Generation, and also his last exhibition during his lifetime took place actually in Kiev, a gallery of arts. So now I would a little bit go into political context of all these events. The splash of Ukrainian cultural life in 20s was possible due to the Bolshevik politics of so-called colonisation. In Ukraine, it was named Ukrainization. So they tried, Bolsheviks, I mean, they tried a little bit to go into distance into from Russian Empire policy of swallowing up all the nations included into the empire. So they stated internationalism and development of all the ethnic groups and ethnic groups which were part of Soviet Union. But very fast they understood that it leads to very dangerous moods of separating from the whole body of Soviet Union. And at the end of 20s, all these liberal tendencies really were destroyed by a couple of decrees which really forbid further development, as we saw at the beginning of 20s. And this period is now called as executed Renaissance, because this race of cultural life and art in early 20s had a very tragical final. So I will continue with artists belonging to the circle of Kiev Art Institute. Another prominent personality is Mikhailo Boychuk, and the school founded by him, so-called Boychukists, artists who also had a very good European experience of collaboration and education, and they aimed to also to invent that big Ukrainian new style, and they worked mainly with monumental paintings. Also, they had the ambition to create very integrative approach, working with different types of art, applied arts, architecture, and paintings, and so on and so on. Due to the fact that at that time all cultural life was subordinated to the authorities, and the state was the only one who would order them their work. They collaborated with them and produced a number of monumental paintings in a variety of theaters, institutions, and so on. However, at the end of 20s, situation changed drastically. They were accused of being spies in bourgeois nationalism and all these labels, which were invented by critics from authorities to claim actually their creations. So Mikhail Lobochuk was arrested together with his followers like Vasil Sedlyar, Ivan Padalka, and they were executed in the prison of NKVD in Kiev in 1937. A wife of Mikhail Lobochuk was also arrested a couple of months later and also executed. Their names were banned for decades, and even mentioning them on public could lead not to good consequences to the one who was daring to speak about them. Most of their creations were destroyed, so nowadays we work mainly with here and there preserved sketches, rare photos, and so on. However, in museum collections there are some pieces available to research and to see, and on the exhibitions which I mentioned at the very beginning, you can also see some of their creations. Speaking about executed Renaissance, we can't avoid the personality of Les Kurbas, the film and theater director, who was, how to say, the engine for avant-garde theater in Ukraine. He was one of those excuse me. One of those revolutionaries who turned Ukrainian theater, which was quite conservative at that time, into a totally different level, close to European best practices of the time. He invented new forms of performing for interaction with audience and so on. Also, he managed to collect around him bright artists, actors, musicians, script writers, and turned into a huge phenomena, which is recognized, which was recognized even internationally. And of course, this success couldn't just pass through the attention of authorities. Here you can see a couple of photos from his performances, and also you can see the stage design and costumes created by the best artists of the time. Vadim Meller. Oh, sorry, I didn't finish the story about Kurbas. So, in 1933, he was also accused of being an enemy of the people, and he was thrown into prison. And unfortunately, in 1937, during the Stalin's Great Terror, he was shot together with 300 other representative of Ukrainian cultural life in Karelia, in Sandarmoh, in Russia. Vadim Meller, the artist who collaborated both with theater and film industry, was extremely productive artist, also renowned in Europe. And he was the one who actually changed the whole language and the approach to the art of stage, and as well as filming, art of stage and films. He was continuing his work till the 60s, and he was one actually of those witnesses of executed Renaissance and bringing this knowledge to new generation of artists in late 50s and beginning of 60s. However, all his progressive achievements remained in 1920s, beginning of 30s, and he had to change his creative approach into quite conservative way, which was permitted by authorities. Another his colleague was Anatoly Petritsky, extremely bright artist who worked in the field of constructivism, and also created lots of works together with Les Kurbas, and I will tell later about Vovku, Ukrainian film production company. And he also faced the challenge to somehow to betray his beliefs from youth in order to preserve his life. And this is one of the tragedies which faced lots of artists in Ukraine. So if you decided to save your life, your families, and so on, you had to collaborate. And especially at the first, at the mid 20th century. Speaking about 20s, a little bit of film industry. Why I'm saying industry? Because it was a really industry which developed during 9 years of existing of Vovku, the all Ukrainian photo cinema administration. It was the time when Ukrainian films really turned into extraordinary phenomena in so-called Ukrainian Soviet Republic. Cinema became films and cinemas became a top of interest of wide range of society. So everyone was involved, and during only these 9 years, they managed to produce over 140 films. But 60 or 70 of them, unfortunately, are not preserved till nowadays, and Researchers still are looking for them in international archives, and sometimes they are really very successful. Ukrainian films were screened not only in Ukrainian and other Soviet republics, but also in Europe. And some of them were really very popular. Film industry involved best professionals in art and cultural field of the time. So best artists were creating these posters, working with scenery, decoraines, and so on. Les Kurbas, the theater director I mentioned before, also was involved into Vuvko film production, and he created several films. However, they didn't survive till today. So now we can only imagine how they could look like. Also, Vadim Meller. Petritsky were tightly connected to this sphere as well. The iconic director, Ukrainian film director Alexander Dovzhenko, is one of the most controversial personalities, and during this Renaissance period, he created his main masterpieces, this so-called trilogy. And the main artwork is film Earth, which was produced in 1930s, and it's a unique example of most innovative approaches as well as Ukrainian tradition. The film itself depicts the tragedy of Ukrainian village, of Ukrainian traditional culture, which at that time faced the so-called collectivization and industrialization, which these politics became the core approach of Soviet regime, rearranging Ukrainian and Soviet in general economy. So this film was banned after 9 days, as I can remember, after its premiere, and was rehabilitated only in 1950s. Also, this film is considered by international community like like one of the most important in the film history of 20th century. And when we speak about executed Renaissance, the symbolical place is the so-called House of Writers Slough. I must apologize about this slide because I see I forgot one word into these numbers to add. So what I meant, I will tell what has to be written over here near the number 33 a bit later. So this house was built with the initiative of writers who developed a project of the residence for creative personalities, mainly for artists, as one big creative hub with fruitful atmosphere to create, to work, and mainly not to think about everyday routines, to create a kind of to create a spot when they could live and work, because at that time most of them remained in poverty. So at the end of 1920s, the building was built up, and turning back to these numbers on the slide, it had 66 apartments and from this number in early 1930s for so excuse me. So the KGB arrested 40 inhabitants of this house, and 33 of them were later on executed. Here are some of representative of this generation. And the first picture is Krushelnitsky family, those who were arrested and executed. Representatives of Ukrainian, not only Ukrainian intelligentsia, but also those who were kind of symbolic for their epoch, with their impact into building up of Ukrainian state in 1917-20s. Most of those artists, writers, poets, other creative professions ended up in Beguine graves. This is the mass burial on the outskirts of Kiev, and approximately researchers say that there are up to 100 people buried. For today, only 18,000 names are proved, but the rest are to be discovered. Here, some of the most prominent representatives of executed Renaissance are buried up right now. The next spot is Sandarmoh in Karelia, as I mentioned before. almost 300 of Ukrainian artists, writers, and so on were shot here in 2 days in 1936, and all these murders were committed to celebrate 20th anniversary of Bolshevik revolution in Russia. However, when we speak about mass murders committed by Soviet regime, these Sandarmohs are located throughout whole territory of Ukraine. So here are just several of those which we know right now. And what is necessary to notice that Soviet authorities were very good in erasing any trace of memory about these crimes. So these places were forbidden to mention. They mostly were not discovered till 1960s, and And for example, in Khmelnytsky, on the place of these mass burials, a big shopping mall was built. So they tried to erase every memory of those actions which actually were aiming to erase Ukrainian as an ethnic group. When we speak about further development of history after World War II, the next try of Ukrainian culture to survive, to revive, appeared in the late 50s, beginning of 60s. After Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev started the policy of de-Stalinization and a little bit less of censorship, and some liberation of environment took place. So for Ukrainians, again, appeared a chance to develop a little bit their own vision of culture, art, and sorry for pathetic, but spirit. So, what was important for the most active circles of cultural life was, first of all, discovering the roots for culture, and speaking loudly within the terms of their vision of creation and so on. The heart of this time was concentrated in Kiev, and mostly this period is associated with so-called creative youth club, so namely Suchasnik or contemporary. And this was a circle of kind of soulmates from different spheres of intellectual life. So participants of these clubs, it was a young generation, active generation, artists, journalists, researchers, historians, musicians, translators, poets, and so on. What they actually did, mostly it was a communication with the same interest, with the same intention of discovering the history, first of all, because at that time they revealed the crimes of Soviet regime of 1930s. They tried to bring back the memory about forbidden names, forbidden artworks, and all the phenomena we were discussing about like a little bit earlier today. And one of the also iconic representatives of this generation and this circle was Alla Horska, the monumental artist who took an active part in activities of this Creative Youth Club. And what is important that actually she, together with her colleagues, discovered these massive graves in Bekivnia in 1962. And it was a very important turn within this artistic circle, because the truth, step by step, started to be evident. And they also made attempts to claim authorities, to state their to discover and to admit all the events which took place on previous decades. This was, of course, noticed by authorities, and Soviet power never forgives this disobedience. So here you can see as a sketch to a stained glass composition, which was produced by Alla Horska in co-production with other artists. And this piece was destroyed immediately after its installation. And the artists who participated were excluded from the National Unity of Union of Artists, which at that time meant that artists occur out of artistic process in general. So they had no any orders, they had no work, they were prohibited to show their works on exhibitions, and remained actually without sources to live. This is another composition created in Krasnodon by Alla Horska and the team. And here some more mosaics from Mariupol. They were produced in 1967, and you can see their condition right now. They are destroyed by Russian bombs. Alla Horska also was not only a creator, as I said, she took an active part in political life. She was very active in defending human rights, because in 1965 so-called Khrushchev's Thaw was wrapped, and the first repressions against active intelligentsia started. So her friends were again accused in the crimes they didn't commit, and got into prisons for a long period, and as well as other representatives of this generation. These arrests led it to stronger resistance. So if at the beginning of 60s these artists and writers were focusing on Ukrainian identity, history, art, and so on, now it turned into political position which was opposed to the officials. Viktor Zaretsky was a husband of Alla Horska and the partner in most of their monumental work. Here you can see some of his paintings from 60s, just to have general impression about art of the time. Also another their colleague, Oksana Shchur, who was imprisoned in 1965, and Alla Horska even made an attempt to meet him in a camp, but it was not permitted for them to meet. And she organized a party when when he was back in 1970, and in some months she was murdered in the house of her father-in-law. And till today, this crime is also not solved. At that time, it was declared by police that it was just a murder on the background of family disagreements. But this fact brought this movement, this rise of art and culture to understanding that liberal period is totally over. Here also Halina Sevruk's works. She was the companion and colleague of Alla Horska, Viktor Zaretsky, and she also participated this so-called 60s movement. She also faced those persecutions by Soviet authorities. She was excluded again from the unity of Soviet unity of artists. I forgot to say that what was the reason for that in 1968. All these mentioned personalities signed up the letter of 139. It was a letter to the heads of Soviet power, claiming against illegal arrests of intelligentsia. Of course, nothing happened except authorities got the list of those who were against them, and this disobedience was punished later on. Lyudmila Semykina also belonged to the generation of active artists of the time, colleague of the artist mentioned before. She also was prohibited later on to work in big forms, in monumental art, so she turned into fashion design, into film and theater costume creation. So all these, as I mentioned before, these researches for inspiration in art history of Ukraine were implemented into costume design. Time is running out, yeah? Long ago. Okay, I will shorten. Another very impressive example of this connection between artists and authorities during Soviet time is the Wall of Memory created by Ada Rybachuk and Volodymyr Melnichenko. This was meant to be a wall, a monument which was dedicated to life, improving the not improving, but stating the glory of life. In Kyiv biggest cemetery, it had to be a complex together with crematorium. It's a really huge object, the biggest monumental sculpture composition, and they worked during 13 years to build it up, and it was quite challenging because the technique they used and what was really innovative at that time. However, right before its opening, authorities decided to not to demolish it because it's too big. It's 2,000 square meters of these reliefs. And they decided to cover it. You can see on the top of this slide. So it turned to be a faceless, just wall without any sign of art on it. But activists made an attempt to a little bit to restore it, and they managed to uncover a little part of it as it is shown on the picture below. Speaking about 60s, it's impossible to forget the iconic film Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, extremely popular creation of this time, which was awarded and recognized on many international film festivals. It was directed by Serhiy Parajanov, and apparently it occurred to be the first and the brightest film of Soviet era about Ukraine. So the story of its production is very interesting, but I understand that we have lack of time already, so I must shorten my tale. And Serhiy Parajanov, I would just in general say that he was very important personality for the artistic circles in 60s. And he managed to create, he was Armenian and who was born in Georgia. However, he managed to create truly Ukrainian work depicting the spirit, the deep spirit of Ukrainian identity. And another point which must be mentioned here, that the premiere in 1965 of that film was the first attempt of Ukrainian intelligentsia to protest against arrests of their colleagues. This fact was also noticed by authorities, so those who had speeches at the premiere were arrested, lost their jobs, and unfortunately Serhiy Parajanov was also arrested at the beginning of 1970s. He was prohibited to work, and his talent, as talents of thousands others, was not developed in a full scale as it could be. Another representative of those times mass culture is composer Volodymyr Ivasyuk, who was extremely popular at his time. He lived only 30 years, however he created over 100 songs. Most of them were really very popular. However, he didn't collaborate with authorities. So he was found hanging on the tree in 1979. At that time, police said that it was a suicide, but everyone knew that it was not truth. And Prosecutor General, as I can remember, already admitted that it was a KGB operation. However, names are not being revealed yet. And his funeral in 1979 was also one of the first most crowded events, which turned authorities to be endangered with the action of disobedience. Vasil Stus is a very tragic figure of this time. He belonged also to a generation of 60s, and he took part in 60s movement. He took part in Creative Youth Club, and he created, he wrote many research articles about executed Renaissance. Most of his works were destroyed by the power, and he spent 13 years of his 47 years of life in camps. He never stopped to work, and he wrote so-called like diary from the prison, and somehow managed to pass them outside the walls of the prison. And they became a reason for Ukrainian diaspora to nominate him to the Nobel Prize for Literature, but the committee was not in time, and he was found murdered in his cell in 1985. He was arrested twice in 1972 and 1978 as well, 78 or 80, I believe. He belonged to Ukrainian Helsinki group, which consisted also from Ukrainian representatives of like writers, translators, and so on. There were 38 members, and they all were imprisoned in total for 550 years. This group was established in 1976, and persecution started almost immediately. So their aim was to defend human rights, but this combination of words didn't relate to official policy at all. So most of them went out from prisons in late 80s. And the final how to say? No, it's not final slide. the final event, perhaps, which I want to tell you today. So it was the funeral of Vasil Stus, which whom I mentioned before, together with other political prisoners. Their bodies returned to Kiev in 1988. And their funeral turned into a real rally where Ukrainian blue and yellow flags were raised. Important to notice that even combination of these colors were banned during the Soviet rule. So here, but here it was a gesture of this crowd of people, because under different evaluations there were from 30 to 100 attendees of this rally, and in fact this was the beginning of a new story, which ended up or started with the fall of Soviet Union in 1991. And to finish my story for today, I want to show you the installation by Alexei Sai and Bogdana Kuzmina, which was presented on Burning Man in USA like a month ago. And it symbolizes our rise from ashes, constant from century to century. So this is what we are doing now, and we are hoping for future. Thank you.
Svitlana Valko, who was one of the founders of Truth Hounds organization, which is documenting war crimes also in cultural heritage, and which is connected with many activists and telling us about some cases about damaged cultural heritage objects, and also artists and civil activists who are artists and who were prosecuted or killed or arrested for their Ukrainian identity and for their job. And now the first question is Svitlana. Please start with what is Truth Hounds and what is documented war crimes, and then why documenting of cultural war crimes is so important as documented of other also very sensitive, painful and touchable cases. And then we will continue. And the main question is only artists as a target, and why artists and civil society activists are so special targets in all this current Russian-Ukrainian war. Thank you.
Thank you, Oksana. First of all, I will tell about my organization. So organization Truth Hounds, as you understand, we love dogs and we love truth. We documenting war crimes and crimes against humanity and trying to prove genocide, so different international crimes. Since 2014, and we worked not only in Ukraine, we worked in Nagorno-Karabakh, we worked in Palestine and Transnistria, Belarus, and other places where we were needed in this period. So this is an organization who gathering evidence. So of course we have lawyers, but they are not the main like in our organization, the main people are working on the field. So we go to the places, we collect evidence, we collect testimonies, we look on the satellite maps, we compare the craters, we identify the weapon, we identify the perpetrators, and we trying to bring those evidence to justice. We fight in impunity. So, as you understand, artists are not our main target. We don't work with artists. But we think that attack on cultural heritage is a war crime. How do you think why? Why attack on culture is a war crime? Because like there are much more like heavier crimes like killings, tortures, and forcible transfer of children, sexual and gender-based violence connected to the conflict. Why attack on the culture is treated as a war crime, international crime? No, we will talk about cultural genocide later. Oh, same. No. We work on the framework of international humanitarian law. And this is a very practical and very sometimes cynical law, because it was created during last 100 years, 123 years probably, with the gathering of few groups of conventions, Den Haag conventions and Geneva conventions. You know about Geneva conventions, right? So this law saying that we can't prohibit war because people again and again starting it, but we could create some rules which is prohibited to violate. And those rules, like if the soldier is killing the soldier, everything fine. Everything fine because it's a war. But you know, you don't violating the rules of the war. But rules, norms, and traditions of the war are the base of this international humanitarian law. And the Rome Statute, the main document about war crimes right now, saying that in the Article 8, explaining what is war crime, they just name it. They say that you can't attack, especially intentionally, you can't attack specially protected objects, civilian objects, which are aimed to work for cultural, religious, or educational or medical purposes. So art, there is word art in this article. For lawyers, you know, it's very important that if this building, the purpose of this building is art purposes, is a specially protected object. So if you like shelling just a building without religious, art, educational, medical purpose, just a building, it could be a war crime if there were a lot of civilians who died. Yeah, then you attack civilians. But if it was empty building, or this building was staying near the airport where the military jets were staying, it would not be crime. It will be a collateral damage. Why I say that this humanitarian law is cynical? Because of mostly collateral damage exists in this law. Like if we have a military target which is staying near some other objects which are civilian, and if our target is legitimized, so we mean it's give us some benefits immediately in the war. So everybody who die near these civilians who die near or who suffer is a collateral damage. Sorry guys, we did not meant to hit you. We were shelling this military object and you were just near. So it would not be a war crime. But if you intentionally or like unproportionally targeting the buildings and objects, monuments, like mass graves, which are aimed to be the function of the art, religion, architectural memorials, etc., it will be treated as a war crime. So our, all, like me, my colleagues, other human rights organizations who work on documenting war crimes, our aim always to prove was it a war crime or to prove something opposite. Like sometimes we go to the spot, we examine the spot, we collecting testimonies, and we could say, okay, it was not a war crime. It will be super hard to prove because there were two armies staying here, they were shelling each other, and this museum was on the between two shellings, two armies. Yeah, in this case, it will be collateral damage. And the most difficult in this work is to prove intention. Especially when the Russian authorities always saying that, oh no, we were shelling the military object. There is no military object. So our Our goal is to prove that on the moment of the shelling, there was no military object. Or, for example, in some cases, they use the weapon. For example, we want to shell to this Ukrainian checkpoint. Checkpoint is just a few militaries and maybe some concrete stain on the road. For shelling this checkpoint, you don't need the missile, which costs $2 million, right? So that's called unproportional attack, right? So we need to collect all the evidence of all these crimes. Sometimes when during the war, when you execute in some military activities, you do some, you destroy some heritage, some many different objects of culture, and it still will be a crime even you did not aim it, because when you destroy a dam, like it happened in the south of Ukraine, huge dam, which like half of their Germany could be in the water. You should think that all these objects, civilians and hospitals and schools will be destroyed, right? So you should think about. That's how the law say to us. So we should prove either intention, or we should prove the unproportional attack. So you probably want to achieve some benefit in the war zone, in the front line, but you did not think that the price for this benefit will be too big. So one director of museum told me one phrase that if Russian army destroy everything which they could not take with them to Russia. And we see, if we compare some crimes committed, potential war crimes, we did not prove with the court, some crimes committed on occupied territories and on territories controlled by Ukraine, we could see the difference of these crimes, and we could see that this quote was very accurate. What happened, for example, on Kherson Oblast of Ukraine, which was under occupation 8 months? I know it so well because I'm also originally from this oblast, and my parents spent 7 months in occupation there. So during this 8 months, Russian army we call it in legalish, we call it effective control. Yeah, so during this period, they conducted effective control under this territory. So they were under power, they were deciding who will live, who will die, what is ours, what is yours. They were like on power there. So during this period, they committed a huge lootage of cultural objects from Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast. So, for example, from the collections of Kherson, just the biggest city on this area, museums like historical, national museum, natural museum, museum of art, they stole 170,000 of objects with a name that they don't steal, they evacuate them. So you would never see them again. And among those objects, of course, a lot of very valuable paintings, but also some priceless architectural and historical objects, like from ancient Greek period of south of Ukraine, and some Gunic period, and including 1,500-year-old golden tiara from Skif period. They just evacuated to the territory of Russia. We don't know yet. Some of them we could follow, like they appear in some museums in Crimea, for example. But some of them maybe appear in some private collections of officers. When we see this attack, we should understand that this lootage was blessed by the top commanders. So we call it the pattern of attack. The commander, under the law, they have a special mode of liability. So the law say that they should know or they knew what their troopers do. So if he say, you could do whatever you want. So it's also responsible person. But in this case, this was like planned lootage. And so far, we could say that the official statistics right now by Ukrainian Minister of Culture, they reported that 664 objects were damaged on the territory of Ukraine so far. But I think this statistic growing every day. And so far, we don't see the full picture of this damage, of this attack on cultural heritage, because some places are occupied, some places suffer from ecocide, which is legal term, and some places are still inaccessible for us. But we could say that, and some experts say that this situation surrounding destruction of cultural heritage is a part of Moscow military plan. So, of course, any intentions is hard to prove. What the lawyers do, we collecting in public speeches of Russian authorities who has audience, B, some power and some resources to commit this crime. So, for example, the head of world-famous Hermitage, the collection of treasures in St. Petersburg, he said that there is no one can stop the attack on Ukraine. No one can stop. The person who is the head of art object saying, we will attack till the end. No one could stop us. And he clearly said that the culture is a part of the offensive strategy taking over Ukraine. Also, for example, the head of Russian intelligence, also head of Russian Historical Society. They really understand the power of art in the identity, for example, of Ukrainians. They really understand what role art commit, especially last 30 years of Ukrainian independence, with books, with learning, teaching kids with this heritage. What does it mean for Ukrainian nation, for history, etc., etc. Let's look on few examples on not occupied territories. So many museums were destroyed. Sorry, I have only pictures for you, no text, which is, I think, better. For example, let's start from this museum. So this museum is a museum of Grigory Skovoroda, very famous Ukrainian philosopher, who died with the phrase, the world was trying to catch me, but did not catch. Yeah, it's very famous person who was also barefoot traveler, and the monument of him is in the middle of old Kiev. And he was originally from Kharkiv Oblast, and this building where his museum was also the monument of architecture. So, because it was old 19th century building. And it was attacked on May 7, 2022 by Russian military. They destroyed totally. This was the National Literary and Memorial Museum of Grigory Skovoroda in the village. It's not even in Kharkiv. At the same attack, they shoot on the memorial complex of victims of Holocaust. Maybe it's part of the Nazification of Ukraine. The oldest Orthodox church in Kharkiv and the mosque were damaged at the same night. So the museum is located in the village, 18th century estate, where Grigory Skovoroda worked last years of his life and near which he was buried. And this year, it was the day when, the year when it was 300 years from the date he was born. And the museum was renovated, and they were planning to celebrate this date with different art events all the year. So the missile shoot the roof of the building, and the fire broke out. The fire engulfed the entire building. The 35-year-old son of the museum director was injured, and he was brought to the hospital, to the intense therapy. And luckily, the head of the museum, I think he was suspended the bad events, and big part of exposition was evacuated before, but they were moved in advance to safe space. But the fire, which caused by missile, Russian missile, was lasting 9 hours. They could not stop it at all. And they destroyed 280 square meters of this museum, and nothing left. Very interesting and motivating for us Ukrainians that the monument of Skovoroda was staying even after their fire, as a spirit of Ukrainians, which are like invincible. Yeah, I'm not joking now, but this was a really very famous attack, and the Ukrainian prosecutors opened the criminal case under the violations of law and customs of war. And the Ministry of Defense of Russia, they say that shellings of this district was aimed by military necessity. And the testimonies collected by us and other human rights defenders, Kharkiv human rights groups, they say that it's not true. There were no military objects around in a big area of this, and that the weapon which was used was a sharp weapon, you know, not the weapon which aimed to damage a big field of vehicles like a multi-launch rocket system. It was a missile, very sharp, so you could know where you're shooting, you know, like. So the analysis of collected information give us the reasonable ground to believe that we could preliminarily classify the war crime under Article 8 of Rome Statute. And we believe that it could be bring to justice in the future, because International Criminal Court in Den Haag, they already have had the precedents when they bring to the court some people who are guilty in destroying cultural heritage, and they prove that it's war crime. It was happened, for example, with one Islamist from Mali, Ahmad al-Faqih al-Mahdi. He was sentenced to 9 years, and there was a huge fine he should pay for destroying historical and religious monument, mausolees and mosque in African city of Timbuktu. After this event, the Ukrainian activists and Ukrainian government addressed to UNESCO why Russia is still a UNESCO member if they don't value cultural heritage and want to destroy somebody's heritage. Do they have right to be a part of UNESCO, whose aim is to preserve the cultural heritage? And UNESCO still did not do any conclusion, but we know about I will make a video, right? I can say it. No, I will say it. The united nothing. Sometimes we can't expect really good consequences and good decisions from them. But I do believe that it's a matter of time. Wait for a second, I will show you. Yeah, him again. So he was surviving 9 hours of fire, and this is also his head. So the world was trying to catch him, but still did not catch. Another story I want to tell you is, as an example, this site where I was myself. It's an attack on Maria Primachenko Museum. Maria Primachenko is a world-famous naive art painter from Ukraine. And during Soviet time, Russians were trying to make her image as a simple village woman who draw animals and flowers, mostly, right, as a village talent. But she was not so simple as they were trying to explain. She was she used a lot of metaphors. She used a lot of in her paintings. She also did some statements. For example, this is her picture, but I wanted you to show this, which she created after Chernobyl tragedy. And it was like about the third reactor of Chernobyl nuclear plant. So she used a lot of metaphors, and she was trying to support Ukrainian folk art and other art. Her museum was built in 1992. It was actually in the village where she was born, in Ivankiv in Kyiv Oblast. It was a historical local and history museum. But in this museum, there were 25 of her paintings. Like this, amazing, by the way, I love them. So museum, except this museum was kept 410 exhibits that told about the history and culture of the region. During the Russian offensive of Kyiv in February 2022, tried to attack Kyiv, the museum where this art of Maria Primachenko was located came under enemy artillery fire. I was on this site myself. I documented this. So this is the building of museum. Was spent a lot of money to renovate it recently. And all the witnesses who was near, they testified that there were 4 rockets shot into this building, which is for us as a people who trying to gather evidence. For us, it's already kind of intention. It's not 1 missile, it's 4, right? So it was a target somehow. Anyway. What happened next? It's not a sad story. Yeah, I tried to find for you case which is not so sad, but also I could assume it's a war crime, right? So the good story of this that first who was see the fire, which was lasting 9 days, I guess, was the museum guard Anatoly. So his fence was adjoined the museum building, and when the roof came off, he jumped into the fire, ran and broke the window and bars. There were bars also, and climbed inside and pulled everything he could out of the fire. And this how he saved 14 paintings of Maria Primachenko. Unfortunately, he was not able to save everything. So the first of her works, it was plates and some pre-revolutionary towels, carpets, 2 200-year-old interior items and works by other painters like Stepan Savchenko, Vasil Skopich, Anna Dmitrieva, embroidery. They were burned by this attack. But the time before, also some local citizens, because they saw the lootage and the patterns of attack of Russians, they hide some works of Primachenko in the basements, and after he saved it, he knew that Russians will steal it. So the citizens of this village, they took one to their houses. They just disseminate all the works and hide them in their basements and in their some wardrobes and other. So even the head of museum and the head of the village, two women, Ukrainian women are tough, by the way. Two women, they made a video of this fire as a testimony, but they were forced to destroy it later, to delete, because Russians were checking all the phones. All who could be too much Ukrainian, they are targeting. Yeah. So in general, we have some footage, video footage, a lot of drone footage and photo footage, even a very short footage of attack, and we checked all their possible military targets around. Around is a park. There are no aerodromes or plants which make, I don't know, energy or tanks or something. There is nothing which we could treat as a military target. So whenever it was intention or it was just occasionally damage, it's a war crime. But the qualification is still needs some more evidence. Would it be unproportional attack, or will it be intentional attack on the art building? But this is one of the example I bring you from 600. Right? And each case we need to look, on each case we need to look separately, because each case should be strengthening with evidence. And when I was invited for this lecture, we were talking with my art friends about cultural genocide. I beg you guys, stop using this term, because this is a very legal term with a very particular meaning, yeah, and it's also an international crime. So when you say genocide, and when our president say genocide, of course we understand what do we mean. It's to destroy something, some group of objects or some group of people with the same characteristics as a part of like international crime or hate crime or ethnical crime, etc. But in this case, we have already the name of it. It's a war crime. Destroying cultural heritage, it's a war crime, and we should remember about this when we do like interviews and when we talk about this. But let's talk about how they use culture again in this war. So I bet that each of you are familiar with Russian propaganda when we see something white and they say, this is black. And everybody say black. I think everybody also read Orwell, so you know that now it's situation like this. So they say absolutely opposite. Sometimes when we collecting evidence and we read, unfortunately we should read this and listen them. So we analyzing what they say. So sometimes they committing that yes, we shall this because they're military, but when they destroyed, they killed too many civilians or destroy some national heritage, UNESCO heritage, etc. In next days they say, no, they were Ukrainians who shoot it. So our goal is also to catch them when they say, yes, this is us. But next day they say, no, they were Ukrainians who shoot it. And it's very complicated. But we collecting also patterns. And I could say, as a person who collecting evidence and provide them to International Criminal Court, that there is a pattern of destroying cultural heritage. And how we could see it more closely, we should look on the occupied territories. And this is also something which we trying to explain to our German partners, to our French partners, to people who support Ukraine. When they say, a lot of peace builders saying like, why you could not agree that they could took these territories. But we fighting not for land, we are not greedy. Even it's our land and our ancestors buried there, it's important, right? But we are responsible for all the Ukrainian citizens who stayed in occupation, and as soon as your territory is occupied, you are facing enforced disappearances, persecution of artists, journalists, and activists. It's the first what they do when they enter in the city. So Russian army come into the new city, they starting searching the houses, talking with the people, and gathering artists, journalists, activists. Because for them, they know that these people are the core of the culture, the core of the identity, the core of the resilience, right? And they they torture them, they killing them, they do different things. They trying to use them and force them to do propaganda videos to say opposite what you believe. And this is something I want to talk with you about also very shortly. I want to tell you two stories of two artists of Ukraine who was killed by Russians. And these stories are not the same because one murder was done in occupied territory of Kharkiv Oblast, and one murder was done near the front line, but on the territory controlled by Ukraine. So please meet kids writer, kids books writer, how it's correct, right? So the writer who was writing kids book, Volodymyr Vakulenko, who was living in the village Kapitolivka, occupied village Kapitolivka, together with his son, and he was his only one guardian and his old father. So during all his life, he was not only a writer, but also Ukrainian activist who was promoting Ukrainian language in his village. Everybody will know his position, that he don't speak Russian, he don't answer Russian, etc. Sometimes it was very manifestating. Sometimes it was some events he was creating, a lot of events. He was participating in all local events, art events, cultural events, language, philological events, which possible. And he was also writing amazing books for kids. There is a story that his intention to start to write books is going from his carry of his son who has autism, and he's developing him and reading him a lot of books, helping to live and to cope with some difficulties in communication with other people. So when the occupation started, it was very fast. It was very fast, and we can say that, of course, it was not prepared, but it's happened in the immediately in February and March 2022, and occupation of Kharkiv Oblast was very fast. So this person, this prominent Ukrainian person was kidnapped twice. So first time he was kidnapped together with his son, the minor, by the militaries from so-called Lugansk People Republic. They were keep them in the street Lugovaya. They catch some buildings on the street and they use them as their headquarters. They tortured him, but they were trying to ask him about some militaries in the city and policemen, etc. But then they released them, they let them go. It was on 23 of March 2022. But next day, 24 of March 2022, Volodymyr Vakulenko was kidnapped again, but this time with Russian troopers. And Russian troopers put him in the white bus with that poor Zorro, right? Like he would never be ready that it will be a bad sign in the future, sign of fascism. So with that letter, and they bring him to the city Izum, also famous city in Kharkiv Oblast. And since then, nobody knows anything about Volodymyr Vakulenko. His body was found among other tortured and killed citizens of Izum only in May 2022, so after 2 months of his abduction. This body was there more than months. So 1 month he spent in captivity, 1 month his body was already buried. There were more than 400 civilians killed in the city by Russian troopers, including him. So he was buried with no recognition under number 319. And then they did DNA expertise, and it was confirmed that this is him, and he was buried in his own village. There was 2 bullets in his body, and the signs of tortures on the bones. So what happened? We could only assume. So he was taken. Now everybody's saying that somebody said that this is pro-Ukrainian artist who is always promoting art and who is writing books in Ukrainian. This is enough for attack, actually, in occupied territories. I know some hostages who was taken in captivity because they have too many Ukrainian books at home. So this was a reason for captivity. But this time, he didn't spend few years in captivity like many people in Donbass before, on the previous stages of war. He was tortured and he was killed. We, of course, investigating this case, and we found their car which take him after the bus. We identify him. There is a video when they took him out of the car. We identify his sweater, and his mother confirmed that it's probably him. He also was in the house shoes, you know how it's called, pantofle, no? House shoes. So they took him from the house on the eyes of his son. So we identify this military vehicle, which is called Tiger. And it gives us the possibility to identify 2 military units who was responsible for his abduction, because actually the Tiger is quite rare. Mostly it's used by the officers, and this Tiger was before on many other videos of abduction of the people. So we found 2 possible units who was connected, who could be connected to this crime, and we found the heads of this head of the division unit who responsible for this crime. And why we could say it? Because, as I said before, except Volodymyr Vakulenko, the Ukrainian writer, there were 400 civilians captured, tortured and killed in this place. So that means that this military unit has first order for such behavior. Second, the military commander not only knew that his troopers do this, but also give the order, because they organize these places, facilities for tortures, and then he give the order to kill them. So he's fully responsible. And we did this investigation because, first of all, we, like many friends of Volodymyr Vakulenko, were demanding this, but we also did this because we are looking for pattern. Like, what are the people whom they kidnapped, torture, and then kill? In Kherson Oblast, in Kharkiv Oblast, in Zaporizhia Oblast. And we definitely could say it's not all the people. It's not like, I don't like you, let's go with me. No. They looking for people who work as a journalist, artist, ex-military, policemen, hunters, and activists, and civil activists. So this is the vulnerable categories which they come to the city and they catch them, like Volodymyr Vakulenko. Sometimes they release them, or sometimes they transfer them to Russia. Sometimes they kill them, especially in 2022. Mostly they were killing them. And this is the pattern which we could definitely already confirm that in Kharkiv Oblast, in Kherson Oblast, and Kyiv Oblast, Chernihiv Oblast, Sumy Oblast was the same. They act the same in 2022, right? And before I will jump to the next case, I was trying to answer Oksana's question. Are their artists targeted? What do you think? Do you think they are hunting writers or painters? Could we say that this pattern? I think that what happened here with Russian philosophy of attack, that's only my opinion, but also from different evidences, right, with these vulnerable groups. We could say that Ukrainian artists have mostly a very active civil position. A lot of artists in Ukraine are doing nowadays, I'm saying nowadays, but also as we knew from Mariana's lecture before also, right? So many of them do artivism, that's we could say, it's not a legal term, right? Artivism, so artistic activism. They do installation, they sometimes participate in protest with the art. They draw what they see, they write about what they see, and this is kind of, they try to show the reality they live with the help of art, international language. So I think there is no special hunt on artists as so. Like if you are a painter, probably many of them don't know what is the danger from painting. But they treat artists as a potential activist who could resist. So in this particular view, I could say that there is a hunting on artists in this war. Yeah, I can't say that they have an order to hunt artists, but definitely they hunting artists as active citizens of their country. Except extreme patriotism, Volodymyr Vakulenko was a promoter of Ukrainian language. During his 1 month in occupation, he did a diary, and he was feeling no fear, as his mother said. And he was writing on Facebook actively the truth about occupation all this time, so he was not hiding. He did these diaries and he hid them on the ground in his garden. After his body was found, his father was trying to find these diaries, but did not found, and he was very upset of this. He's of course old man, but he showed me this place, but I forgot. And the very ironic and sad and kind of scary, fatalistic situation that those diaries were found by another Ukrainian writer, Victoria Amelina. He came to his father's house, and they start to dig together, and she found them. And she bring them to the Kharkiv Museum of Literature, and they restore, because it was a bit wet underground, and they restore, and now you could buy a book with his diary of Volodymyr Vakulenko. When I tell you the story, if you don't know of Victoria Melina, you will understand why I say that it was ironic, sad, and fatalistic. Because Victoria Melina is a Ukrainian writer and poet who was quite famous and active. And because she's a writer, she writes about the reality of Ukraine, she writes about what's surrounding her, and also a poet who was doing poetry even during the invasion. She was also the active citizen who was working with stories, which means that she was a field worker of my organization, Truth House. She was going with us to the missions to the liberated areas, and she was collecting testimonies of the people. For her, as an active citizen, it was important to be a part of something to fight impunity of Russian army in Ukraine committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. But also, I not suspect, I know for sure that she was also interested in this work as an artist who could think about the destinies of the people, who could write about in the future fiction. She was doing fiction, but also she wanted to be the speaker of this decade, you know, who was telling the stories, real stories of Ukraine. Also, she was very active. She was speaking languages. She was active in the conferences and residences, and she was traveling around and making speeches about the real situation in Ukraine. So, when we start to, and she was killed, when we start to investigate, this investigation will be published on our website soon, and it was very hard for us, because despite maybe I'm sound a bit pro-Ukrainian, it's not like this in the field, because we need to collect the evidence, and if we collect evidence that Ukrainian troopers made a crime, we would not hide them. Yeah, we will bring them to prosecutors, and we will fight for them being punished for this. So it was really hard to make an investigation, because, of course, for us, killing our one of us, it's a big crime. But legally speaking, it could be or could be not. So we did an investigation, and we. Let's say we hope that those evidence we collect will be taken in account by International Criminal Court, and that the people who killed Vika and together with her killed another 13 people, among them young girls, sisters, they will be punished in the future. So what's happened? Victoria was accompanied the 3 Colombian journalists who asked her to come with them to Kramatorsk and help them to work. Despite any Russian fantasies about who are those people, spies or something, they came to Ukraine as a part of the project on Global South, because in Latin America, Russian narratives among journalists are super popular, and they came to see themselves the situation with civilian population and attacks on civilian population, and they came to Kramatorsk. At 29 of June or July, I have it, of June, they came to Kramatorsk, and they came to local pizzeria, very famous, big pizzeria, tasty. And because Kramatorsk is a small city on the front line, it was very popular among everybody. Like all the international experts were eating there. All their, sometimes Ukrainian troopers who are on the way home for 5 days, they were eating there. Local people, they were eating there. And it was time of the dinner. When the shelling started, it was 7:30. the time when people eating the dinner in the pizzeria it was full. There were near 60 people there inside. Or 60, I mean like 80, 60 people were injured, 13 people were killed. So to investigate this, this is quite close to the front line. So it could be war crime or it could be collateral damage, as I told you in the beginning, right? And we could say that for telling it for sure, we did like huge work. And we started from the weapon. Remember, I told you, there is some weapon which need to be used only when there are many tanks on the field, right? Because it's cover a big square of the field, battlefield. There is a weapon which is very sharp. Among them, different rockets, missiles, ballistic missiles. They are quite sharp. Even when they change the trajectory on the air, the place where you shoot in, you choose on forward. So you could choose the place, push the button, not button, it's not like this, but kind of push the button, and then near next 20 minutes, it will fly, 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 and then the place when this weapon chosen was chosen 20 minutes ago. It's not, you know, like it's not changing trajectory on the air. They know what they're shooting. We made a big job for this investigation to analyze the weapon because there were many, many different options. The president say one, the prosecutor say another one, the witnesses say something else. So we compare the trajectory, we compare the sounds, what people hear. We came to the place and look on the crater. We compare many, you could read it on our report. So in the end, we found that it was a flying rocket Iskander K. They are different. This cost $2 million. Sometimes we are, you know, like Ukrainians, we coping with all sad news with a humor. It's our coping strategy. But some people say it's a dark humor. That they say, like, to kill Victoria, they spent $2 million. Like, it was valuable for them, right? So we also could say that its pattern, which was next 2 months, they use all the time. So they use it in Kharkiv Oblast, in Lugansk Oblast, etc. They shelled only civilian objects, and then they say, oh, it was a military object. That's what they do. And in the range, radius, like range of this missile is 500 kilometers. So the possible places of launching this rocket, it could be occupied territories like the Donetsk region, or Krasnodar Krai, or Rostov, or Belgrade. So it's not very big. And we need to know this range, we need to know the weapon also to find the perpetrator. So after the big work we found him, we assumed that this person was responsible for this missile attack. So Victoria was actually heavy wounded, and people who were sitting with her on the one table were not injured. She was injured, she was sitting on the corner, she was injured to her head, and they all were very lucky, I mean, because there were some paramedics who were there in 7 seconds. So they drive all the injured people to their intense care, and she was transferred there then to Dnipro, to intense care, who are specialized, I'm sorry, for some injuries of the brain, but unfortunately, she was wounded too much and she faced coma, and in 2 days she died. So after, was it an attack on artists? I don't think so. Was it a war crime? Yes, it was. Should it be punished? Yes, it should. What kind of crime? We could say intentional attack on civilian object, or violation of the principle of proportionality. We have two options, which crime it will be, and then only court will decide which crime it will be when they will see all the evidence. But was it an attack on artists? No. But if we see, as Oksana said before, if you look on Ukrainian artists right now, especially writers, we have extreme huge amount of writers who are serving in the army now. I know only 3, but there are more. Like, it's only those whom I know personally, like 1 poet and 2 writers, great writers, by the way, my favorite. They're serving in army because they are active citizens. There are many artists who are volunteering on the front line and could be killed anyway, any day, I mean. There are many artists who lived in occupied territories and whose destiny we probably don't know. Maybe they are hostages among 2,000 of people in Russia. Maybe they were killed. There are some local writers who are still in captivity or still in occupation, and we don't know their destiny. Maybe they were tortured and killed. Is it a hunting on artists? I don't think so. Is it war crimes? Every attack on artists we documented? Yes. I assume it's a war crime, and I will do my best to prove it. And it should be punished. But I should emphasize that sometimes in the past in Ukraine, like all the time in the past in Ukraine, it was really dangerous to be an artist with active citizen position, active Ukrainian position, protecting language, protecting roots, heritage and position, and not hiding crimes committed by occupiers, you know. And due to this historical overview, which Mariana really described us before, we could say that now, if the artist will be catched, he will be persecuted. If the artist will work as a writer, collecting historical memory, preserving historical memory, he could be killed. If the artist will protest against the war, etc., is in danger, and not from Ukrainian side. So, in the end of my speech, hope interesting talk, but we didn't talk too much because you're sitting so far from me. I would say that attacks on cultural heritage, attacks on artists, persecution of activists and artivists will be documented and will be punished. I do believe this, really, but we can't promise it will happen soon because the war is ongoing and we don't know the picture. And we, unfortunately, the scale of the crime is so huge that there is no time for us to look on the cultural damage so far because there is a big human damage, you know, and on the many things, on many situations, if you're choosing to document transfer of children or to document destroying of museums, you will choose children because they are still in danger, for example. But this is a time when artists, artistic managers of artists and people who connected to culture should help to historians, should help to human rights defenders, and should also participate in documenting those attacks. I do believe that this is time when the cultural workers, creative people who work in creative sphere should also be a little bit human rights defenders and documenters, and they should collect those evidence themselves. Because if you start protecting culture, you should continue to do this, and we will help. Thank you for your attention.